Good afternoon. My name is Justin Hardman. I'm one of the founders and directors of 21st Century Learning, who are organizing this online streaming conference. So thank you for joining us today. I'm going to be with you for just a couple of seconds here while I introduce Kirk McCullough, who is joining us from Keystone Academy in Beijing to lead us through a presentation of Beyond Grading. If you are joining us live, please feel free to drop any questions or comments you have for Kirk in the chat, whether you're on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever, and we'll have an opportunity to get into those towards the end of the presentation. So over to you, Kirk.
Thanks a lot, Justin. And hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk on Beyond Grading. So this all started when 3 years ago, grading was incidentally removed from my ICT course. And as I was sitting there compiling my grades for the science course I still teach in primary school, I sort of thought, wait a minute, why am I still grading in one subject but not the other? And then I thought about it some more, and I started to think, have I lost anything in not grading? Have I gained anything? And I started to explore, and it's been a wild and exciting journey that I'm happy to share with you. So let me double check everything's good here. All right. Hopefully the tech holds out for us. So I hope you learned something and maybe change the way you think and maybe change the way you teach. So real quickly, my name's Kirk McCullough. I'm from America. I've been teaching internationally for 10 years. You can see the breakdown of that now, but this is my 5th year in Beijing and my 2nd year as the head of our primary and STEAM department in the primary school. And I did IT and engineering for a little while. So that's part of where my technology background comes from. So here's a broad overview of what things are going to look like today. Talk very quickly about what is grading, make sure we're talking about the same thing. Very brief history of how it came about, what its purpose was, is, and should be. What's wrong with grading, that's going to be a bulk of it, because I think if I can convince you of what's wrong with grading, you can figure out part 3 a lot on your own. But I will share some ideas, some things that I've been doing, some things that other people have been doing, and try to connect you with this community, if you're interested. So what is grading? Probably most of you already know what grading is and have an idea in your head, but I did want to make sure we're separating grades from feedback. Grading is a type of feedback. All grading is feedback, but not all feedback is a grade. So make sure we separate those. Grading, we're talking about the score, the symbol, the letter we attach as an assessment of student performance. They're usually recorded and communicated with various stakeholders, often used internally and externally between institutions. So this was interesting for me to dig into a bit. Grading is pretty old. It started in the 1600s as an internal private ranking and record-keeping system for certain universities. And you could sort of see how it just sort of grew organically. There was no master plan in place. It wasn't put in place for some grand scheme. It was more for people to keep up with their own classes and their own students. And then it sort of became a keeping up with the Joneses thing. Oh, Yale's doing it, so we should do it. And then it sort of grew from there. And interestingly, in my research, there was never any, I don't think there was any big conferences or people sitting down and agreeing on stuff. It seemed to just sort of rise organically, like I said. And if you're wondering what happened to the E in our A through F grading system, by 1930, it had disappeared. There's a few theories for why that is. But why ever that happened, it seems that the disappearance of the E may have been the last big development in grading that was widely adopted for almost 100 years now. Another thing that stood out for me is that one thing has been consistent in grading over the centuries, and that's inconsistency. Despite everyone's best efforts to make things consistent, they seem to be inherently inconsistent. We also want to use grades to assess growth and understanding. I'm going to talk about the challenges with that. But these are the things we want grading to do. I'm going to talk about whether that's actually possible or whether grades are the best way to do it. But I think this is what most of us are asking from our grades. So we can still assess and give feedback without grades, but I'm going to talk about that more. Why do we grade? I tried to break it down into some sort of specific reasons for grading. So most of these you probably know about. We may not always think about all of these, but these are ways that grades can be used and are used by different people at different times in different circumstances. So you may be grading for one reason, I may be grading for another, and then the parents may be looking at the same grade for another reason, and then the university, the secondary school is looking at it for another reason. So we're actually asking a lot from grades, and I'm gonna argue we're actually asking too much of grades. Here's some more reasons. I think sorting, ranking, comparison, and selecting are some of the most pernicious reasons for grading, but they're also some of the most heavily utilized and also the sources of some of the greatest stress. And also we have the increasingly criticized standardization, and we're going to talk about whether standardization is possible or even desirable. So another thing I gathered from my research is that, as far as I can tell, the only stakeholder that benefits from grading are institutions. Grades were made by institutions for institutions as a quick, low resolution for sorting, ranking, selecting, and communicating records internally and externally. They were really not made with people in mind. So already you can see that it's been leaking out my problems with grades, even in the description. And that's because I think they're flawed from inception. From my studies here, I'll share a long list of sources at the end, but you see I've highlighted in orange here. Diminish interest. They make people go for the easiest tasks. They disincentivize critical thinking, and they lead to disposable knowledge. I was talking to my wife, who's from Hong Kong, about I said, we were talking about something. I said, didn't you learn that in school? And she said, yeah, but I gave the learning back to my teacher. And I thought, wow, that's such a great phrase, because grading really encourages that kind of thinking. You walk into the classroom, the teacher gives you the learning, you regurgitate it on the test for a grade, and then you're done with it. You give it back to the teacher, or you throw it in the trash after you're done with it, and it's not staying in your head where we want it. So I can't think of any other profession where modern theory and current practice are more at odds. We know grading is bad from both personal experience and professional training and research, and yet we keep doing it. And if you're like me, you may have never thought about it until recently. Why are we doing this? And it's really it's become such an ingrained, expected thing for everyone that we may have never actually stopped and thought about why we're doing it, whether we should keep doing it. So I'll say it explicitly. Obviously, I am biased against grading at this point. You can probably tell, but I'm going to back up my claims with research. And I will say I did try to look at the other side. The benefits of grading, I was not able to find any studies on the benefits of grading. There were studies on how one type of grading might be better than another, but there was nothing saying that grading is just a unalloyed good. So as I mentioned, it's flawed from inception, from their very design. They were designed with institutions in mind and not people in mind. They were not designed to motivate students. They were designed to streamline and keep track of and communicate low resolution information. And another interesting thing I found is that the criticisms of grades are not new. They're over a century old. The people asking these questions are not even alive anymore. And yet I feel like, sadly, their questions still have not been answered or even properly addressed. So even in 1913, we could see that it's stressing teachers and pupils. We hold grades to be some like source of truth, or to say something objective about learning and students' achievement, but they don't. And they are uncalibrated, as Finkelstein said. And I thought it would be fun here. This is what Finkelstein was talking on the phone, and this was the state of aviation back then. And yet, this is basically what my SAT test looked like: rows of desks when I took it 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And if you change the color on it, I feel like it would fit right in. And these are often the most pivotal points for our lives: SATs, ACTs in America. One giant test, the Gaokao in China, that controls your fate and your future, and a whole bunch of outcomes, all hinging on a number grade. So let's talk about the data for a bit. I pulled up a lot of studies here. Like I said, I'll share those at the end. And I invite you to dig into it, because there's a lot of great stuff there. So what does the data show? That grades will motivate students short term, but they'll lead to that disposable knowledge I talked about. They don't promote a lasting understanding. And as soon as the external motivation is gone, they're left with no internal motivation, and they're basically the same or maybe worse off than when you started after you pull out that artificial motivation to grading. And it is a direct distraction from an obstacle to authentic learning. If you're a big proponent of authentic learning, which I hope you are, then you should see grades as inimical to that. And it will increase cheating, as you probably have known. If you ever worked in a graded environment, cheating is a necessary outcome of that. So from this study, I tried to break it down because the discussion was very dense and complicated. So I made a graphic here, which is probably also a bit confusing. So let me try to explain it here. Who was this? Anderman and Murdoch. No, not Anderman and Murdoch. Sorry, I think it's on the next slide. But basically, there's two axes that he broke his experiment down on: the controlling axis and the direction axis. The controlling axis is grading and scores, and that's basically the teachers still control how they assess and how they value the outcomes and what that outcomes are valued. And then you have direction. Direction is where the teacher decides what the student's going to learn. So on these two axes, you have 4 quadrants here. You have the controlling and directed, which is the rote learner of the 20th century. I hope we can all agree that that is no longer what we want our students to be. Then there are 3 other options, but we ultimately want our students to be the authentic learner, the autonomous learner, which is what you and I hopefully are. You know, I sat down to investigate something because it interested me. Nobody told me to make this presentation. Nobody told me to do the research. Nobody's grading me on this. It's purely my autonomy and my authentic interest. And if you did try to grade me on this, I think it would have killed my inspiration, and this would have been half the length and far less effort would have been put into it. My classroom right now, so this one confuses me a little bit because this is you're controlling, you're grading, but you're not directing learning. I suppose this would be an option if you are required to grade, but at least you can still let students choose their own, choose what they're going to be researching and learning about, but you're still grading it at the end. I've made this center line thick here because I think it's very hard to move students from controlling into non-controlling, or from a graded into a non-graded environment. You're either grading or you aren't. So that's why I made that line thick. And I made the vertical line a dotted line because it's easier to move a student from directed into non-directed learning, which is, I think, what we're trying to do. So my classroom is more of the non-controlling directed, where I'm telling the students what to learn, and I'm trying to minimize the impact and the influence of grades, although I am still required to grade, but it's more of an afterthought. Not an afterthought. It's something that happens at the end of the process, and I try to minimize its influence in the class. So anyway, this is confusing. I don't know if hopefully you find this helpful, but you can read this study yourself, but there's a lot of studies and a lot of stuff to digest here. So grading and learning are 2 different and directly competing goals. I broke it down into some of the things that grading elicits from students versus what we want our learners to be demonstrating on the right there. And you'll see that I think the left side has a lot of things we don't want. Hopefully we can agree on that. And the right is what we do want. So if you are asking, you can't have both of these. The more you emphasize one, the more you de-emphasize the other. So I am saying that we should be getting rid of the left, the grading side, and emphasizing wholly the right side. And another way to say that is performative versus authentic learning. Performative learning is you're learning because you've been told to. It's what's expected of you. You have the threat or reward of a grade hanging over your head. Versus authentic learning, like I talked about now. I'm interested in this. This is something I want to do and get better at and learn about. If you ever heard a student asking if it's going to be on the test, then that's a red flag for you there. That means they don't care about the learning. They only care about the outcome and the grade. And that's that disposable learning that they're going to throw out as soon as they're done with. And here is a sad quote I found in one of the articles about a student who had her desire crushed by a rubric. I still remember this happening to me in my writing class when I was in high school. You may have memories of these things too. We're going to talk about that a little more. These are formative experiences that stick with us our whole life. Grades directly interfere with learning. This was a really eye-opening study, a couple of studies actually by Butler. And again, I encourage you to look these up if you can find the time. She did 2 separate studies, but basically in the end, she got 4 different groups. They all went over the same task. They all did the same tasks, and they were all assessed at the end. But basically, one group received no feedback or grades. One group received only grades. One group received grades and feedback, and one group received only feedback. And the group that received only feedback performed better on basically every metric, including actually, I believe their confidence was lower, but their performance was better than the grade students. So this was just a really surprising thing, and it's one more piece of evidence of why grading is bad. So there's so much evidence out here, and there's so many ways you can look at grading as a negative impact. I really encourage you to you can start with my sources as a starting point, but there's a lot to dig into here, and I feel like there's a really strong case to be made here. Grades also work well with a teacher as an authority and the sage on a stage system that many of us are moving away from. We want to be guides on the side. Well, if you're the judge and arbiter, then you're not the guide on the side. You're ultimately the authority and the sage at the end of the day, no matter what you call yourself or where you stand in the classroom. So I really think grading is not going to fit with that guide on the side model that many of us are moving to. Students are teacher pleasing. They're thinking about what does the teacher want, what's going to get me the best grade. They're not focused on the learning and their own interests. So those can often be interruptions. Sadly, I still remember when I was a newer teacher and much more focused on the grading and the curriculum, a student would express their interest in something and you'll say, sorry, we have to cover this. This is going to be on the test. We don't have time for this. And that's something I really don't like saying as a teacher. And it's very much a one-way communication usually. Here's your grade, take it, and that's it. That's done. You get the grade, the student gets the grade, that's the end of it. So this may be something that you remember from your childhood. I certainly do. You get the paper back, your eyes immediately go to the top, the grade, that's all you care about. All the other stuff doesn't really matter. Maybe you'll glance at it, but you probably won't think about it too much. How much time did the teacher spend grading that? We'll talk about that later too. How does a student feel? Probably don't feel great getting a C+ or a 78 back. If you're a good student, you feel like you underperformed. If you're a bad student, it's just one more nail in the coffin for why you're a bad student and how there's no hope for you. How did the student feel getting it? How does the teacher feel grading it? I was never thrilled marking work like this. I don't think it's a very, it's very isolating. You're often marking by yourself as a teacher, and you have that sinking feeling that nobody's even going to look at the work you put into it. Where's your attention drawn to the grade there? What happens next? Probably the kid doesn't sit down and give a good long reflection at it. They probably look at it, they feel good or bad, and they throw it aside and move on with their day. And once again, all this work that the student and teachers have done are compressed down to one number or symbol. Grades are also not very useful for communicating. That 78% goes in a grade book somewhere, and all the context and the bigger story is lost for the streamlining and standardization of that number. What does that mean when somebody else looks at it? Was it a perfect essay that was 78% complete? Was it a 78% student doing what they're expected? Was it a 50% student going above? Did they run out of time? Did they freeze up? Why? What's going on with the student? What's going on with the teacher? Is the student having a hard time at home? Did his girlfriend break up with him? Is the teacher going through a divorce? Did he not sleep well last night? Is this the 100th essay he's graded and he's just getting tired of grading? All of that is lost. We have no idea what's going on. We just have that one number or symbol there. Did the students not follow the instructions correctly? I got knocked for this all the time. I have messy handwriting. I put my name in the wrong spot. I didn't put my name on the paper. Am I losing points for that? Is it my writing? Is it my instructions? None of that is communicated effectively through a grade like that. A huge one that I bet you have experienced yourself. All grades are not created equally. You have your hard and easy teachers, and students often know who this is. When I was in university, we used a website, ratemyteachers.com, and you could go and look at reviews of people. Do they grade hard? Do they give homework? Is attendance graded? And we would make very cynical and calculating decisions about which teachers we got. We would take ourselves out of the hard teachers class and put us in the easy teachers class, not for better learning, but purely for that cynical calculating grade. We have grade inflation or grade compression. where if you don't have an A, it really doesn't matter if you have a B or C. It's not acceptable. So there's increasing pressure on teachers to get the A's, and increasing pressure on students to get the A's, and increasing pressure on schools to make sure everyone's getting A's and nobody's failing. So you have a lot of strange things going on there. Differences between institutions, differences in countries and cultures. Is an A in Uganda the same as an A in South Korea? Is it the same processes and philosophies? Is it the same from classroom to classroom? Probably not. And another bit of research I found here that was saying that basically no matter what you do as an institution or an individual, grading is and must be subjective. And I found a very funny quote, or maybe a sad quote here from Twitter, where the student was saying that being on the grading committee felt like debating about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And these are discussions and arguments and pressure points that I felt my whole teaching career, and I imagine many of you have as well. And then you have the outright gaming of the system. And by that I mean, of course, we have our good old cheating, which, if I cheat and get 100 on a test, that doesn't mean I know the content at all, or that I'm learning or making progress or anything. I've completely invalidated that result. Teaching to the test. If I know what's going to be on the test and I teach you and tell you more or less explicitly what's going to be on it, or let you see old copies of it, how are you really learning, or are you just mimicking what you've been told? Study guides and cheat sheets, those were a big part of my university career. Grade curves, when grade curves ruined me in university. Just some crazy stuff going on there, where you could fail the class and all of a sudden you had a C on the report card. I'm not sure exactly why we're doing that. You could always brute force an assessment. I was a bit displeased when I took my teacher assessments, which were largely multiple choice and writing and all the things that I've been railing against, but that you could just keep taking the assessment over and over and over again until you pass. So what's the point of even of assessing if you can just try hard enough and get through? You don't actually have to learn. Something I would have done, you just keep taking the test and memorize the questions until you can pass it. And you've just, once again, you've wrote learning your way to success. And then external pressures. I don't want to fail this kid because I don't want to have to argue with the admin, and the parents are going to come after me. And what's the other teacher doing? They're giving all A's. Well, if I give a bunch of C's, I'm going to look bad. All sorts of messiness and things that have nothing to do with learning getting involved here. Bias has been a big point of discussion over the last 10 years. You basically, the more of these boxes you tick, the better you will do through no fault or work of your own. If you're born into an unstable household, your grades are almost certain to be lower. If you take longer to take tests, if you freeze up on tests, if you have poor physical health. My brother missed a lot of high school because he was in the doctors a lot, and that was not his fault, but yet his grades suffered. Mental health, if you're depressed, you're probably going to have a hard time taking tests and those sort of things. So there's so many ways where just the deck can be stacked against you or for you in no meaningful way. It's good for the good, or maybe it's okay for the good, and it's bad for the bad. The students that are great test takers and like taking notes and like rote memorization excel, are promoted and rewarded. The kids that don't are punished and demoted, and their self-esteem goes down and their grades go down. You get this nasty feedback loop for both the good student and the bad student. The good student becomes better and the bad student becomes worse. And then the middle gets forgotten about because all the teacher's time is focused on the kids who are failing. We got to stop them from failing. And then any other time you're helping the upper kids because they need more extensions and differentiation, all that. And the middle gets forgotten about because their grades are okay. You're not worried about them. And even if you are excelling in a graded environment, there is a small portion of the population, from my experience, that does well in the graded environment. When you get dumped out into the real world, there's no grades, there's no report cards, so you're really not well prepared for the real world either. So I don't think anybody benefits from this. And by removing the pressure and burden of grading, we can better distribute our time amongst all of our students, not just the good and the bad. Not everything can be graded, nor should it be graded. And I think even trying to grade some of these things would cheapen them and render them inauthentic, like your values and your effort to grade those things. If you're a teacher, you probably know that one kid who sits there and works for an hour on something and he gets half of it done or half of it right, and the other kid that takes 5 minutes on it and gets it all right? You know, which kid deserves a better grade for that? I don't think anyone can answer that question. Creativity, innovation, perseverance, none of these things can be properly graded. And again, I don't think they should be graded. That would devalue them. And because they can't be graded, they don't show up. They are either explicitly or implicitly swept away, swept to the side, and devalued because they cannot contribute to your grade. Grades in conflict. Grades basically make everybody fight with each other. You have students competing with students. You have teachers arguing with teachers. You have parents competing with parents. You have parents pressuring teachers, teachers pressuring students, admin pressuring teachers, parents pressuring admin. I've seen all of these things. Admins arguing with other admins. Policymakers get involved. Everyone's angry at everyone. We're not pulling towards a common goal. Everyone's out for themselves. Everyone wants to get the good grade at any cost. You may be experiencing these right now if you have some hostility from grades, or what I like to call weaponized grading. Time spent grading. This is an area of particular interest to me. And this first quote really stuck with me, that most students virtually ignore all the work you do on grading. You sit there, you take all your grading home, you work on it for 5 hours, you give it back to the kids. They look at the score on top and they throw it in their locker, their bag, or they throw it in the trash because they're done with it. I did find an interesting survey here. Grading came up, I should say it was classified as grading and feedback. So we should still be using time on feedback, but the more time we can free up for grading, the more time we can free up for feedback and all the other things we should be doing. Planning fun and engaging and learning experiences, and coordinating with our teams, and co-teaching and co-planning and communicating with parents and sharing learning and putting together portfolios and all these things. So many better uses of time than grading. So I think we could all use more time. I think that's one of our most valuable resources. And something I've learned the longer I teach, if you find yourself as a teacher doing all the work and the student is not doing any of the work, that is a recipe for disaster. That is not sustainable. That is not a good use of your time, and it's probably not benefiting the student. So I'm going to talk about some ways we can get students more involved in the feedback process, because they should be involved in the feedback process and taking responsibility for their learning. The emotional side of things. How does it feel to be graded? It usually doesn't feel great. At the very least, you're being assessed and judged, and someone's passing their judgment on you, and you may or may not agree with it. I've certainly felt wronged by grades before. If you think back, I bet many of you have strong negative emotions from grades at some point in your life. It's rare that any of us escape unscathed from that. And that shows you, if these are sticking with you, for me, like 20, 30 years later, these are very powerful formative experiences. And thankfully, we are not graded as adults. I can't imagine any of us would want to be graded as adults, because it would still be an emotional experience, whether you were graded professionally or personally. I'm sure many of us would not get the best grades in every aspect of our life. How would that feel? Would it motivate you? Would it make you angry? Maybe both. And it creates a power dynamic that is inimical to a harmonious, holistic environment. If you have someone, as we said before, the authority who's passing judgment, that's not good for your relations. Which feeds into the human cost. People give up on school. It's very sad. I'm sure many of us have seen it. The kid that is he's failing in this grade, and then he goes on to the next, and he's failing and failing and failing and just keeps failing. He's given up. He's a bad student. He's a bad learner. He's dumb. You hear students say these. I've certainly heard it many times. Self-esteem. Your self-esteem goes down. As your self-esteem goes down, your performance goes down. You get that negative feedback loop again. I guess that's a positive feedback loop. This was a sad one for me. My wife told me a story how when exam time was coming in Hong Kong, she had to choose like the top 5 exams to take, or she had to choose 5 exams to take. And she was very interested in art at the time, but it was not a pragmatic choice for a grade. Art is subjective. She wasn't sure she could get a good grade. She cut it, and that was basically the end of art for her. And now 10 years later, she's finally starting to get back into art. But I can't help but think how many students have had this happen. The course of their life has been changed by something as trivial as which class is going to give them a better grade. Giving up on passions, cynicism and apathy was a huge one for me. I went into university curious and excited, and I came out, I was so apathetic. I was making all of my choices based on what's going to get me the best grade, what's the minimum amount of work I have to do. all those things I mentioned before, I mention them now because I've personally experienced them. If you're not grading homework, I'm not doing it. If you're not grading attendance, I'm not going to class. If you're curbing the grade, I'm looking at where's the minimum I need to get, what's the minimum work I need to get the maximum grade. Just not a good place to be. And then you have all the family stress, anxiety, disappointment. I was walking down the hall this year and there's a kid crying. Oh, what happened? I failed my math test. How's that student going to feel about math as he goes into secondary school? Just my heart goes out to these kids. Students calling themselves dumb. We were just doing a little sort of a diagnostic quiz activity in my class, and one of the students said, "Mr. Mack, please don't show." That's what they call me. Mr. Mack, please don't show us the results. I don't want to see it. They didn't even want to see their score, even though she got a good score. She didn't want to see it. And then the darkest side of grading, social withdrawal. After you've been dumped out by the system and you're a bad student and dumb, you go live in your parents' basement and give up on life and you get a low-paying job because you don't go to university. That can lead to a whole downward spiral there. Forgery, there's a whole black market of you can buy essays, you can pay to have someone take your exam for you. AI is pumping out, artificial intelligence can write your essay for you. That's going to be a wild thing to keep up with if you're still trying to grade. I don't know how you're going to stay in front of that. There was the Varsity Blues University scandal in 2019, where people were paying their way into university, paying for good grades, bribing instructors, faking learning disabilities to get higher test scores, pretending to be on sports teams. None of this has to do with learning, but how can we get that end outcome, that those high grades and those the things we need to succeed in life. And then it gets pretty dark. Suicide. I was reading about how 1 in 3 students in Korea has contemplated suicide because of academic burdens, and grades were at the top of the list for the reason for their suicidal thoughts. It can get pretty dark. And there was even a story of a girl who was sort of the traditional, really overbearing parents expected her to be a straight A student. She kept getting C's. It started off with her forging her report card. It led to her forging her transcripts in college and her living this increasingly elaborate lie that she was going to university and had this internship. And then when it all fell apart, she actually arranged to have her parents killed. Obviously, there's a lot more going on there, but grades were a big part of that story. And it is just generally reductive and dehumanizing. Nobody likes to see their work and their value expressed as a number, especially a low number. All your struggles and personality and everything you've gone through and are going through, all that's lost. The context is lost. And there's a lot of dark stuff here. I saw that in 2021, there was I believe it's pronounced Worcester Polytechnic Institute, had a spate of suicides, at least 3 suicides in about 8 months. And so they put together this task force to put together a list of recommendations. And one of their explicit recommendations was ungrading. So I wasn't even looking for that explicitly, but that was one of their answers to the increasing and out of control stress that many of our students are feeling these days. Okay, so there's hope. All is not lost. We can move beyond grading. We can change this. And just because it's always been done this way does not mean we could or should keep doing it. I challenge you to think about these things that we've all been raised in and lived in and are doing ourselves, maybe without thinking. So Alfie Kohn reminds us that collecting information doesn't require tests. A lot of educators are coming to accept this, and sharing information doesn't require grades. And yet a lot of us are still doing it because it's expected of us, or because we don't know any other way, or because we haven't thought about it. And I like this, just because there are many forms of grading, there are also many forms of ungrading. So there's so many different options, and you can invent your own. I was thinking in new ways as I put this together. Maybe you know some of these already. Portfolios, conferences, and student-led conferences are great ways to get the students responsible for their own work. They should be collating, collecting, reflecting, sharing. That's their job. They need to learn those skills. The teacher shouldn't be doing all that. We're taking away their learning experiences by doing that. We need to make this a discussion, a dialogue, not a monologue. Anecdotal evidence. This was an interesting one for me. While you're sitting there watching the students work, you're taking notes on what you see, and then you have an anecdotal record. I will talk about badging. That's one of my favorites. Showcases is one of my favorites. You know what the kids have learned because you can see it in their products. Authentic tasks. It's great. A student resume. I don't know how well this would work. I'd love to see if people were actually doing this, but we all write resumes. That's a huge part of the modern world. What if students were making resumes all through school? So by the time they got out, they were already masters of resumes and they don't have to start learning a resume after they graduate. All feedback, no grades. Basically, you just strip out the grades and you're only giving feedback instead. Process letters is an interesting one. That's where the focus is on the process, as the name suggests, and the student is documenting the process, reflecting on it. You could have sort of a making of documentary, like here's the behind the scenes of how we did this project, and here's what we learned, and here's what worked well, and here's what didn't. A learning report put together by the student. Personal websites is a great one. Peer assessments get students assessing each other, and then they're instead of the teacher being the authority, it's sort of a discussion about how they did and how they could improve. Reflecting on progress over time, or my favorite one that I would love to do more, students suggesting how they want to show their mastery. The student comes to you and says, hey, I want to do this. I want to show my learning this way. I feel like that's the authentic, the autonomous learner there. They're taking full ownership of the whole process. Another really important thing is failure. If you're keeping up with the literature and the theory of learning, failure is an essential part of learning. You cannot have authentic learning without failure. We need to make space for our students to fail. How can you fail if there's a threat of a grade hanging over your head? You can't. Failure should be recoverable, regular, small, contained. What I like to say is that you can fail at the individual parts, but still succeed at the end. So that's where we as educators can make sure we craft those experiences in such a way. And I'll show some ways that you can do that. Grading causes fear of failure. Not a good match. All right, so my real world experience. I teach around 240 to 280 students given on the year. Through a sheerly incidental restructuring, I had my grading removed, and that has been such a blessing. I didn't even think about it at the time because it sort of happened, but I realized that, wow, the learning is still happening here. The learning's happening better. It's one of my students' favorite classes. They look forward to it every week. There's no pressure. It's just learning. Everyone can succeed because they want to succeed. And it's just been great. Zero complaints from parents, zero complaints from students, zero complaints from administrators. I feel like it's been a resounding success, and more time for me to focus on how I can make my learning, my lessons, and my experiences better for the students, and I can improve my relationships with the students because I'm not judging them at the end of the day. Project-based learning. If you're a big PBL proponent, ungrading will fit in nicely here because it's focused on the process rather than the outcome. I think it's kind of silly to try to grade project-based learning because the project should speak for itself. The learning, the outcome should speak for itself if it's been properly designed. We're focused on the skills. We're focused on the autonomy, the exploration. It's low stakes and high reward. If you fail at the project, well, no one's hurt by that. You can pick yourself up and move on to the next thing and have another try. And it's more fun and it's more memorable. When I ask my students what they remember when I see them in middle school, they always remember the projects and the experiences. They never remember me, whatever I said in class, but they remember the experiences. So let me show you some of the actual things we've done. This is a perennial favorite, Minecraft Villages, where the students are demonstrating what they learned in class by what they build. And they make their own videos, they give their guided tours, they document, they take so much pride in it, they love it, the parents love it, the learning is self-evident, there's no need for a grade would be absurd here. The students want to try their best, they want to make something they're proud of, they want to show it off and share it with other people. None of that happens with grading. So it's been such a great motivator. I can sit back and just enjoy the experience and enjoy the relations and make sure that everybody's actually learning and I don't have to worry about scrambling to write down grades. This is our Ecotourism Expo. The students are taking everything they've learned. They're producing posters, websites, 3D designs, interactive experience for the younger students. They print little flags. They have little passports they go and stamp. When our fifth graders find out that the second, third, and fourth graders are going to come to visit them, it was such a shift in their demeanor. They take it so seriously. They tried so hard. They wanted to be seen as the experts. There was no carrots. There was no sticks. It was the experience that drove them. Fantastic. This was a restructuring of what I thought was originally one of our most boring units. It was about how humans moved out of Africa. So we went and we said, okay, the students are in tribes. They're going to make their own clothing. They're going to make cave painting. They're going to put together songs and dances, currency, whatever they could come up with. This awesome fashion design thing that the kids were doing here. I didn't tell them to do that. I didn't require them to do it. They did all this on their own. You're not having to chase anyone down. The kids are chasing you down. Mr. Mac, can we do this? Can we do that? They're coming up with better ideas than I had, and then I can incorporate those in the future. Cooking is also one of my favorites. It's the ultimate authentic learning experience because you eat your success or your failure. Everybody wants to have tasty cookies at the end. Nobody wants to have a burnt crisp or a salty mess. Every student tries hard. Every student wants to have good food. There's no need to grade it. I mean, you can't see their smiles here, but the smiles on the kids' faces, you can tell how well they did just by their facial expressions. Badging has been a fun one for me. I'm not making judgments about how the kids did. I'm saying this is what they can do. They can do Canva. They can use Seesaw. They can use Teams. They can use a MacBook. They can send emails. They can write it at this speed. It's a purely objective reflection of what they can do. Kids love stickers. It's a good way to keep records and track progress and all the things that you would ask of grading. And it's just all positive emotions. If a student says, hey, I didn't get the badge, I say, well, here's what you need to do. Do it and you'll get the badge. It's easy. So to recap, all of this is to the service of making autonomous learners. We want our kids thinking for themselves and gaining skills. We're scaffolding it to remove the control and direction. That's the ultimate process. When a student graduates from our schools, we want them to not need a teacher anymore. We want to promote their choice and their self-direction. We want their involvement. We want their voice. We want them to be the ones documenting it and sharing it. They should be practicing this regularly. It should not be something that they only start doing after they graduate. We want them to be held accountable for their choices, and we want that internal motivation that lasts after we remove the grades. So basically the benefits are the opposite of all the things that grading do. Reduce your stress and anxiety, reduce your workload, reduce everyone's stress and anxiety, right? Reduce teacher workload, promote that autonomy and responsibility, practice skills. I shouldn't read all this to you. We're removing judgment. And how do I know what my students are learning without grades? Because I can see it. Remember that knowledge can and will be forgotten. Skills will not be forgotten. That's why we have this saying, it's like riding a bicycle. If you ask someone to memorize all the parts of a bicycle, they would forget it almost instantly, but you can hop on a bike 10 years later and still have that skill. Students won't forget the skills they learn, the experiences they have, and the relationships they form. They will forget most of the grades, except for the bad ones, maybe that will stick with them. So I think that's a pretty strong argument for why we should be moving towards this. And it's also ultimately a value of a reflection of what we value as a society. Do we want to be streamlining people and reducing them to numbers? Or are we creating an invitation to learning? Are we trusting? Are we accentuating our students' strengths and helping them patch the holes that are their weaknesses? Are we making space for risk and adventure and exploration? Are we giving our students voice and choice and autonomy? Are we giving them the chance to take control of their own learning? Are we a collaborative effort? Are we working as a team towards a common goal? Or are we arguing about how we're going to grade this semester? This is a big ask. It's basically asking you to make a fundamental change in the way you teach and even the way you think. You may have to restructure your lessons. For me, this has been the most fun I've ever had as an educator. I understand that not everybody wants to pull up everything they've been doing, especially if you've been doing it for a long time. It is a big ask. You can't just remove grades and keep everything else the same. I don't think that's going to work very well, but it is possible. I will tell you that too. We're moving from a monologue to a dialogue. I mentioned that before, and we're sharing our learning through these authentic learning experiences. For any of my talks and any of my projects, my advice is always to start small. Don't rip out everything all at once. There's many ways to do this. Try removing it a little bit. Maybe take out a grade here, take out a grade there. Like I said, I've pushed my grades to the very end of the unit where we're required to give a grade, but I'm not constantly hanging the grades over their heads. I let them know that if they do want to improve their grade, all they have to do is talk to me, and we'll make a plan for them to improve their grade. Because I am still required, many of us are still required to play in these systems. So make a learning sandbox somewhere where students are safe to explore without grades hanging over their head, and give different paths to success. This was a great book. Unfortunately, I found it about halfway through my research, and I'm still reading it, but I would strongly recommend it. There's communities and social media. Look them up. Conferences like this one, YouTube. Talk to each other, share ideas. Let's get this idea spread. I think it is the way of the future. And then many pages of sources here. I can share this if anyone's interested. Whew. All right. I'm done.
Thanks a lot, Kirk. That was amazing. A lot of detail there, a lot of passion, and I really I agree with a lot of what you're saying. We have a comment from Chris in the chat, and I definitely have some questions as well. But why don't I just put up Chris's first comment here, where he's asking, thanks for the informative presentation. I'm wondering what you would say to folks who argue that despite the negative aspects and consequences of grading, that it's a quote-unquote necessary evil.
I see all the comments now, so now I'm really on the hot spot. Thank you, Chris. That's a great question. I guess I would say, are they arguing that, or are they just saying that because that's the way it is? My suspicion is in that case, that person's not arguing that. They don't actually believe that, but that is the way it is. And like I said, I still give grades. I'm still doing it myself. So it's not like I've broken free and I'm not grading altogether. There are still many ways you can minimize the negative impacts of grading and emphasize learning over grading. So again, I fully understand that many of us are going to walk away from here and still have to give grades very soon, probably. So it's not going away anytime soon, but let's start thinking about it. At least if we can internalize that and come to an agreement, that's where everything starts. If we can come to the same page, then we can move forward together.
Mm-hmm. Chris has a follow-up comment, and actually it ties in with a question I had. I'll put up his comment first. He says he's heard often from many Chinese parents and educators that students who have undergone the Zhongkao, Gaokao, or any other kind of high-pressure standardized testing, along with a sense of grade-based assessment and preparation for it, that it develops some resilience that later on helps them succeed in the real world, at least for those who come out okay. And, that did occur to me as you were talking, is there something to be said for grades? This is playing devil's advocate here, that, maybe the grades, are this is where the necessary evil comes in, that like in the quote unquote real world, sometimes you don't want to get up and go and do your job. You're not super motivated to do it, right? And that building up a kind of grit or the ability to do something despite not wanting really to do it is kind of a useful skill for the real world. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm not saying that there's a silver lining to everything. You could force your kid to sleep outside in a tent, and that would build character, right? Is that the best way to build character? Is that something you should do their whole life? Just because you can find benefit in suffering does not mean that it outweighs the good, or that there's not a much better, more intentional way that we could do this. So hopefully that's a start to an answer there. That was a long one. Let me try to look at it again. Yeah, and at least for those who came out okay. What about those that don't come out okay? Not so good for them, huh?
Yeah, totally agree. I thought I might ask one other sort of devil's advocate kind of question as well. We're doing a conference right now all about, in parallel to this, around sports and athletics. And so the analogy of sports and athletics came to mind in terms of thinking about academics in a different way. When it comes to sports and athletics, really the objective of schools is to get kids moving, right? It's about physical wellness and all of this, right? Participation is really the key. Nonetheless, there are definitely students, that want to participate in competitive sports, right? They want to win, they want to be number one, right? That kind of ranking, competitive aspect of it is definitely a factor in their motivation, right?
Right.
And I think the same could be said for certain kinds of kids in academics. So is there a way of having this kind of more pure way of being motivated by in terms of motivation to learn versus chasing the A or the 99% or whatever it might be?
Yeah, that's a great point there, Justin. And something, I'm a pretty competitive person myself in some ways, but something I would keep in mind there is that everybody wants to be number one, but there's only room for one number one. So that's great for the number one, but we still have all the other people. And how do we account for them? How do we plan for that? We have to be thinking about that because 99% of everyone else is not one. So they're not the number one. So how do we take care of them?
Yeah. What is your perspective on standards-based grading? There's been a big, push in international schools towards standards-based grading away from, the letter grade system. Do you think that's a help, or is that just grading by another name?
I was just reading about that this morning, actually, and to be honest, my eyes sort of glazed over. I think at this point I'm a pretty hardliner. You shouldn't be grading, so I kind of don't want to engage with if we are grading, how should we be grading? Like if you want me to grade, tell me how you want me to grade, and I'll grade that way. But I don't want to spend time thinking about if we have to grade, what way of grading is the best way, because I think, as I pointed out, any grading is an obstacle to learning.
Mm. The other thing I was thinking of, and this is kind of towards the end of when you were talking, was, that top quadrant that you presented, and I really liked that quadrant, had the notion of intrinsic motivation to learn, right? Like the student is motivated to learn. But, so much of what happens in schools is that students don't have control over what they want to learn, right? The curriculum says they're learning this or they're learning that. So in terms of schools changing, the schools need to change in such a way that students have more agency over what they learn, so that question of motivation sort of maybe goes away if they have a little bit more agency over what they can choose to learn.
Absolutely, and I'll be the first one to attest to that. That once you start giving students choice, they will outpace you. They will go beyond you. One of the things we're doing with grading is we're boxing them in, and if you start to go outside of that box, well, I can't really account for that with my grading system, so I'm just going to mark you down on that. Or you get 100. You can't really go above 100. So once you open that box up, the kids will start doing stuff that you never thought of. Every year, a student is teaching me something new. I'm seriously learning from my students in a way that I never was before when I was in a more grade-oriented mindset.
Mm-hmm. My colleague Graham's in the chat here. He's got a comment here. I've run courses for year 11 students where students choose their own one-year project using project methodology. Most require significant help to execute the process. Majority just like the process, love the idea myself, but other teachers struggle to make it work. So I guess what feedback would you have to teachers who would like to try this kind of system?
So I see that it's year 11, and I'm working with, I guess it would be year 6s and year 5s. And one of the things I've learned is that the older a kid is, when you hit them with something new, and this is the same for us too, if you ask a kid to start speaking a new language in year 11, they're not going to do very well with that. If you ask them in grade 5 to start speaking a new language, they're not going to do very well with that. You can't just hit people with this whole new way of thinking in the middle of their learning, where they've been doing the same thing, and boom, all of a sudden it's different. That's not going to go well. I'm not surprised. So we do. That's why I said we really need to have a community effort from foundation and the younger grades all the way through. Otherwise, it's just going to be, whoa, what's happening? I have all this freedom. I've never experienced this before.
I wonder how much you follow the whole conversation around gamification of learning. And, I see you talked about badges a little bit. And, I've sat through a lot of talks and read a lot about gamification of learning. And a lot of the narrative around gamification is actually kind of saying, grades are not great, gamification's better, but motivation. But it seems to me sometimes with gamification, it can almost end up replacing, it's like an alternative, it becomes grades, but just with a different name. And I don't know do you have any comments on that? Do you think that, am I just being too cynical about it, or is there something kind of different when you approach, student motivation using that technique?
Actually, yeah, I've always been interested in gamification, but I've never actually done it myself. But I could totally see how instead of giving you grades, I'm going to give you points or scores or whatever it is. And you're kind of just changing the names on that. So that's why I would say I really personally have been much more interested in project-based learning, where you're selecting and creating a learning experience that the kids want to do, and the outcome is something that they want to succeed in, because that is leveraging that internal motivation. Games are fun. Games can be a learning tool. So I was doing game-based learning, but gamification, I think you are just kind of a little shell game, moving the names around a bit there. So I wouldn't say that's cynical, but I haven't thought about that a whole lot either. I don't want to knock on gamification too much because I haven't tried it myself.
Well, I love the badges, and I love your comment about, the skills last forever, but knowledge can fade. I think that's very true. And if your badges are around skills, I think that's a very powerful piece.
Right. And there's no
Okay, well,
right.
I don't see any other comments in the chat at the moment, so I just want to thank you very much, Kurt, for a really dynamic and insightful presentation. I also want to do a quick plug because we're having at the conference in Bangkok in May, we're having a couple of different organizations come out to talk about alternatives to to transcripts for high schools that are all around mastery as opposed to GPAs and other traditional metrics. So I think it ties in. If you're interested in any of what Kirk's been talking about, that might be of interest to you as well. So thank you very much, Kirk.
Thank you, Justin. I really wish I could go there in person. 21
well, who knows? Things are evolving in Beijing.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for your questions and your input.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye-bye.